Warum haben wir diesen Titel so gewählt?
Why have we chosen this theme for this panel? When the Schiller Institute was founded 40 years ago, the first one was that we knew we need a new world economic order, but we also knew this would only be successful if we combine this with the renaissance of the classical culture and the dialogue between the cultures, because it is obvious that if we know the beauty of other cultures and civilizations and see the most exalted examples of these cultures, this very usually leads to a knowledge of that country and a love of that country, and we recognize that the world would be so much poorer if we had only one culture. So with this dialogue of civilizations, what we're trying for decades, we don't talk about culture in general, but we're talking about getting an idea of what these other cultures are about. So the idea of the metaphor is in the European context quite different as in India, in China, but there is a universal reality behind that. So in China, there's the so-called literati painting, a form of painting, of calligraphy, which combines this with poetry, and the meaning of the art work is the combination of all three. In the European classical music, you have the Motivführung, which is a very special thing that you start with a musical idea, and then this idea is being transformed and developed and exhausted, and it ends with a necessary end. And so this is something very specifically for the European culture and literature. So if you look at these secrets of these artworks, then this opens a new universe. And this is the idea why we need to study universal history. Well, so we see how through centuries certain ideas have moved from one civilization to another, but we're all the one humanity which is connected by all these ideas. So it's quite clear that in Asia we have a very conscious recognition and a return to this historical tradition of 5,000 years, while in Europe we don't have that. And I'm convinced that we will only get out of this cultural crisis in Europe if we return to the best artworks, the best periods, the best poets and scientists. And then after we have done that, we can start a process of exchange with the other cultures. So the youth has a very special role in this context, because most of the youth don't have access to, they don't know all these cultural gems. So we will listen to Harley Schlanger today, who himself is a musician, an author who has written on many articles and had very many original thoughts for more than 40 years. He was for 40 years he was a spokesman for Lyndon LaRouche, one of the two main, and so he knows Lynn's life's work like only very few others. So I'm very happy that we have him as our keynote speaker. Then we have a guest from Italy who has also very far-reaching ideas how we can spread the knowledge about culture, Maurizio Abbate. And before that, we have Helena, Chang, who they both need to go to the airport very soon, so we need to hurry. And then we have a panel of young people who have to be encouraged to make themselves creative breakthroughs. And so they're working on that, and they're getting a number of presentations on how our youth works. So Harley, start. Willst du? Yep.
Danke, Helga, and to all the guests. Ich spreche English, tut mir leid. A goal of this conference has been to provide insights into the nature of the crisis we're in, and to inspire citizen activists to act to overturn the axioms which are trapping us in a new dark age. The solutions developed by the Schiller Institute to introduce a new paradigm shaped by the principles of statecraft advanced by the American statesman and economist Lyndon LaRouche require nothing less than an identity shift, a change from the conception of man as a useless eater and a victim of fate to the Promethean vision of recognizing in each child the creative potential to develop one's character so as to act for the benefit of all human beings on the planet. Looking from above at the present crisis, of a world marching toward annihilation, it could not be more painfully obvious that the dominant Western governments and institutions are run by anti-human maniacs, willing to risk nuclear war to preserve the dwindling power of the imperial transatlantic political establishment they serve. As Helga and others have detailed in their presentations, the oligarchs in control see permanent war and depopulation as the best option to maintain their grip over governments and over the minds of the people. Their method for doing this is to use geopolitical manipulation to provoke conflicts, fueling an endless Hobbesian war of each against all, which is reinforced by a culture which replaces an emphasis on the critical thinking required to discover and apply universal physical principles, to replace it with a bestial reliance on sense perception, in which British empiricism serves as a weapon of mass mental destruction. As the pace of descent into this dark age has quickened, increasing numbers of citizens are asking, can't they see their system is in a downward spiral, accelerating due to their foolish policy decisions? Based on the plans proposed by the establishment leaders, the simple answer is obviously not. One has only to listen to the dangerous inanities coming from the mouths of the leaders of the so-called E3 countries, the duplicitous Macron, London's idiot Starmer, and BlackRock's frontman Merz, as they engage in provocations against Russia while simultaneously destroying their own nations, to see that they are merely puppets of a city of London and its financial predator class. Perhaps more inexplicable, though, is why majorities in those nations until now have remained seemingly blind to the evident danger that their nations are sleepwalking into a nuclear World War III, with most remaining fearful to speak out. The failure to put an end to genocide in Palestine is evidence of this moral degeneration. The explanation for this is the belief that it is futile to challenge the powerful tools in the hands of the establishment, which include control of banking and finance, control of information through hybrid warfare, corrupted political parties, intelligence agencies, media, think tanks, and so on, which manufacture and spread false narratives. The widespread use of censorship and attacks on free speech, especially since the false flag terrorism of September 11, 2001, also provides an excuse to justify the complacency, detachment, and cowardice of the population at large. But we are now seeing the emergence of a global rebellion against this establishment, sweeping through the global south with increasing echoes in the west. How can this growing anti-colonial movement defeat the forces which rely on military force and psychological warfare to keep their power? In this panel, we will present a strategy for victory, which includes the launching of a renaissance, which has long been the goal of Helga Zeff and the Schiller Institute, and recruiting an international youth movement to drive and spread the Renaissance using the method associated with Socrates and Plato in classical Athens, the Golden Renaissance in the 15th and 16th centuries, and the Weimar classical period, through which youth developed their inherently creative their abilities through reliving the moments of unique discoveries of the scientists and artists of the past. Successful societies depend on the universal adoption of this approach, through which necessary future advances in civilization determine the course of present policies. A method of governing scientific forecasting, for example, presented by Lyndon LaRouche in his 2005 study, The Earth's Next 50 Years. This includes his advocacy of the special role of youth in launching a classical renaissance. In a lifetime dedicated to scientific and artistic discovery, Lyndon LaRouche provided humanity with a richness of ideas based on a recurrent theme, that human beings are unique in their possession of the creative power to discover universal physical principles, knowledge of which enables man to transform the physical universe for the benefit of every human being. In his work, he took personal responsibility for initiating a deliberative process which started from this premise. Whether as a teacher, a participant in multiple international fora, an author, and a candidate for the US presidency, he ran for president in 8 campaigns from 1976 to 2004. LaRouche's discoveries, particularly in the science of physical economy, of universal history, and classical artistic culture, are the entrance portal for a golden renaissance today. Following the 2000 election in the United States, LaRouche organized a handful of his recruits from the early 1970s, of which I was one, to create a new youth movement, to challenge the moral and intellectual bankruptcy of the corrupt leadership in the West. Here we will see a short video of a presentation from 2003 in which LaRouche presents an overview of how a youth movement can build a new generation of creative leadership to sweep away the intellectual and moral rot which dominates contemporary culture.
So therefore we recognize that mankind is rather primitive. So therefore we recognize that mankind is rather primitive because we keep losing scientific knowledge which earlier civilizations had, and we lose it because cultures are destroyed by relative dark ages. Like the Roman civilization was a dark age of humanity. The medieval period was a dark age of humanity. The 16th to 17th century were predominantly a period of religious wars of a dark age in humanity. Huh? And we keep coming back to rediscover things we've lost. What we're doing, actually, we as an organization are doing and have been doing. We are, in a sense, find ourselves modestly rediscovering great principles which are lost to modern universities in general, but which were known to people before us. We study certain works and realize both that the principle, we also recognize then that people before us knew it, but it was lost because of a cultural decadence in the meantime. So that's the nature of the thing. Yes. Did they have a basic conception? Yes. Did they have a weakness in it? Yes. The weakness is obvious. The idea of universality, of physical universality, existed with ancient man, Greece, and so forth. But the idea of the universality of humanity did not really exist as a practical conception. It was only with the Renaissance, when the idea of that the state can no longer obey the laws passed down by some religious authority from top, a priori, or something else, but the state must obey a provable universal law in terms of its applicability to all of the people of society. That the state is illegitimate unless it serves the general welfare of all of the people. Now, this idea was impossible as a general idea under conditions in which people lived as human cattle. And prior to the Renaissance, in principle, despite ancient Greece, despite Christianity, mankind lived mostly as human cattle, either hunted cattle, as by the Spanish conquistadores, or as herded cattle. As today, most people in the United States are herded cattle. Our struggle is to liberate the people of the United States from their status as herded cattle. They think like herded cattle. A rave dance is an exhibition of people who believe they're human cattle. Otherwise, they wouldn't do such a foolish thing. Probably bad for your back, too. You're bad for your spinal cord, among other things.
Now, let me emphasize that he said it's not enough to discover universal principles governing the physical universe, but that these principles must be applied universally through statecraft to affect the whole population in every corner of the world. This conception of LaRouche is embedded in the fundamental principles drafted by Helga LaRouche to create a new security and development architecture, as summarized in the 10th principle. And Helga, I hope you don't mind if I quote you here. The basic assumption for the new paradigm is that man is fundamentally good and capable to infinitely perfect the creativity of his mind and the beauty of his soul, and being the most advanced geological force in the universe, which proves that the lawfulness of the mind and that of the physical universe are in correspondence and cohesion, and that all evil is the result of a lack of development and therefore can be overcome. And she continues, a new world economic order is emerging, involving the vast majority of the countries of the global south. The European nations and the US must not fight this effort, but by joining hands with the developing countries, cooperate to shape the next epoch of the development of the human species to become a renaissance of the highest and most noble expressions of creativity. I would encourage everyone here and listening to this to study the 10 principles of Helga LaRouche and to initiate dialogues about them among especially youth, young people, to inspire them to wage a battle for the new paradigm on this highest conceptual level, based on love of truth and justice for the benefit of every human being. And don't be surprised if older citizens are moved to join the efforts of the youth in this campaign. Thank you.
Okay, let me thank you very much, Harley. Let me now announce the next speaker, Helena Chang. She is from Sino Press, that's a press institution in Vienna, Austria. And she is also very versed in the cultural dialogue. We had a beautiful little symposium just a week ago with a Chinese university in Chengdu. So please take the take the microphone.
Okay, it works right. So honored Madame Helga LaRouche. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm glad to be here to hold a short speech on change of paradigm. I would say that's a necessary mindset in rediscovering the noble vision of human civilization. Human civilizations, when featured by regional characteristics, are never single, immobile, or isolated. Historical documents and archaeological studies have reviewed the ever-happening interaction of different layers of old civilizations throughout the time. Tribes, lords, kingdoms, and empires rise and fall. Well, they kill and inherit, killing the so-called enemies, but very often inheriting part of the enemy's cultural views, values, or even traditions, thus reshaping the inner structure and intrinsic factors of a newer civilization. Anyone who was ever visited the old site of Ephesus in today's Turkey will have a deep impression and profound understanding of this. I did. To reinforce the point, I'd like to mention a 19th century German geographer, Ferdinand von Richthofen, who coined the word Seidenstraße, which means Silk Road. As silk was one of the precious and symbolic goods transported westward from China. The old Silk Road refers to the trade routes. Actually, it's not just one road, so much more than one road, from China's Hexi corridor to the Central and West Asia, including North Africa and the eastern coast of the Mediterranean in Europe. So it could be said China and Rome were the east and west ends of this route or routes. While silk, tea, and porcelain were among the goods going westward, wool, gold, silver, spices, and precious stones were traded eastward. What's important to notice here is that the old Silk Road carried not only goods, but also ideas, languages, and religions, and also technologies from one region to another. Civilizations crossed each other and interacted with each other, creating linguistic, cultural, academic exchanges, social and political dialogues, and sparkling philosophical thoughts. About the vast interconnectedness of human civilizations via the old Silk Road, the Oxford scholar Peter Frankopan made intensive observations and extensive expositions in his publication called The Silk Roads, A New History of the World, published in the year 2015. I like this book very much. It's a thick book, but really worthwhile reading. In the West, recent centuries have seen the human history written by the sea explorations and industrial revolutions. In the course of this, colonial power established itself as the main voice, being heard as well as justified around the world. Modern-day conflicts are a reflection of this world order, maybe, which is creating a deadlock-like impasse for human civilizations to progress harmoniously and healthily. On 3rd of July, as Madame Helga mentioned, we held a nice online talk with each other, Sinopress, which is an independent media outlet based in Vienna. Yeah, I'm from China, but I've been living in Vienna for 30 years. Before I moved actually from United States to Europe. Yeah. Well, I enjoyed this talk with Madame Helga LaRouche very much, also joined by a couple of other experts on the topic of education. And I have brought actually some copies of the transcript of our talk with each other to you. So maybe Jason can help delivering this to a couple of people present. If you're interested, you can also maybe through Schiller Institute ask for the electronic version, which is actually better. This layout is not perfect. I'm sorry for that. Madame Helga said, look, talking about the highlights of European history, sure, there was this great classical period of Plato and sort of dark age like Roman Empire and its collapse, and the Italian Renaissance. And also, not to be forgotten, is the German classic period. And she said, she was born in a post-war period, which where she still had teachers who transmitted the values of Plato, of Schiller, of the German classic period in music, from Bach, Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven, Brahms to Schumann. The value set went along with the humanistic history of Germany, but then came a negative paradigm shift. Quotation, Madame Helga LaRouche. In 1970, there was an education reform implemented by the OECD, which was a deliberate effort to take what they call the burden of the education of 2,500 years out of the education system. No more Plato, no more Dante, no more Shakespeare, no more Schiller. They replaced those with sociology, public relations, and advertisement, so-called modernistic sciences, which I think are not very profound, end of quotation, as Madame Helga put it. So the turning away from the classics has obviously brought an undesirable effect on the aesthetic education, which is necessary to nourish the noble vision of human civilization. Besides the so-called modernistic sciences, the media coverage in the West, supposedly enjoying the freedom of speech, often holds, unfortunately, biased views against part of the world they don't quite understand. As said yesterday morning by Mr. Ray McGovern, there's no free media for 8 decades now. That's how he put it. In our online exchange, the freelance journalist, Mr. Martin Söders from Austria, told us that recently, before the 59th session of the Human Rights Council took place in Geneva, he wrote a letter to the office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, trying to bring to them his voice about China based on his own experience in the Tibetan Autonomous Prefecture in Sichuan province. He visited the place numerous times. He said, quotation, but no, as one can imagine, the letter attracted no support, no attention, no interest, he wrote. So it is a pity that the Western world doesn't know much about the region, but is passionate about criticizing it. And sadly, if one listens to the global update during the 59th session in Geneva by Mr. Volker Turk, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, one runs into sentences like, in Tibet, there are ongoing infringements on cultural and other rights. I call for the release of all individuals detained for exercising their rights and to align legislation and policies with international human rights law. I would say the bias showcased a puzzling ignorance, probably manipulated by one-sided view. Well, in our talk, there was a Professor Yang Minhong from Sichuan University. He said he has been a long-term researcher for that part of the world in Sichuan, that is the Tibetan Autonomous Prefecture. He said he's welcoming everybody to visit Sichuan and to see personally what's happening there socially and also in the educational realm. Anyway, I would make it short, even if I want to say more about it. I think Huntington wrote in his masterpiece, The Clash of Civilizations, that today's world is the one where the Western civilization faces the clashing challenge of Messianic civilization and Islam civilization. But I think the nature of human civilization is to interact rather than to counteract. So, but, as Buddhists, we Asians are mainly Buddhists, have long observed greed, anger, and ignorance are three poisonous suffering-causing attributes in the human nature, which should be conquered by cultivating one's ethics, meditative power, and wisdom. I think this is corresponding to Madame Helga's stress on aesthetic education employing the Humboldt spirit inspired by Schiller. Anyway, the world is facing deadly challenges, be it regional wars or civil conflicts, economic crisis, AI unknowns, I would say, natural disasters, as well as the threat of nuclear weapons. I think superior power or superior complex doesn't work. Geopolitics doesn't help either. Only dialogues between civilizations. Or perhaps singing with each other too, like when Miss Farida yesterday evening sang a well-known Chinese folk song, Kangding love song, from Garatsa region, exactly in those regions in Sichuan province. So, thank you for your attention. I wish you all a good summer.
Thank you so. Vielen Dank, Helena.
Thank you very much, Helena. I think we have to continue this dialogue. I would now like to invite Maurizio Abbate to the podium. He is chairman of the National Agency for Cultural Activities in Rome, in Italy. And he is an original thinker who has many ideas of himself, how we can develop the world. I have to speak in my German is not so good. I have to.
Signore e signore, donne e uomini di quel mondo libero che resiste con forza e coraggio al tentativo di dominio promosso da quelle elite globaliste che da più di 30 anni hanno devastato con guerre e false rivoluzioni, spesso definite colorate, tante nazioni libere, portando morte e distruzione tra i civili innocenti. Guerre in tutti i luoghi del pianeta, in Ucraina, in Siria, in Libano, in Iraq, in Palestina, in Iran ultimamente, in Sudan, nel Sahel e nel Corno d'Africa. Una guerra mondiale a pezzi, che arricchisce naturalmente chi le sponsorizza, ovvero le multinazionali e le industrie delle armi. Aziende capaci di gestire al contempo la produzione e la vendita di armi, la produzione e la distribuzione di energia, così come quella delle derrate alimentari e quella dei farmaci, tutti beni necessari che in periodi di crisi alimentano il mercato nero per l'arricchimento dei soliti noti e l'impoverimento e la sofferenza dei popoli. Una crisi economico-finanziaria indotta che permette loro, gli artefici, di speculare in modo inaudito, con guadagni che molti stati sovrani non possono neanche permettersi. Stati sovrani i cui governi sono condizionati così profondamente da tagliare i fondi alle scuole, agli ospedali. Tutto questo per alimentare il mercato delle armi. Fondi che i cittadini hanno versato con il loro lavoro, con i loro sacrifici, per incentivare la crescita dello Stato sociale e che invece vengono utilizzati per portare le guerre fin dentro le loro case. Viviamo in un mondo ormai alla deriva. Quel mondo costruito dalla mediazione tra i vincitori della Seconda Guerra Mondiale ormai è finito. Lo hanno distrutto coloro che hanno arbitrariamente, dopo il crollo del comunismo, si sono dichiarati i paladini della giustizia, i paladini del mondo. Coloro che hanno bombardato senza pietà per interessi geopolitici la Serbia, la Libia, la Somalia, l'Iraq e ultimamente l'Iran. L'ONU, al pari della vecchia Società delle Nazioni, ha perso ormai la sua funzione. Quando uno Stato può permettersi di bombardare i civili che chiedono autonomia e l'ONU non interviene, tranne che per punire l'unica nazione che sia intervenuta in loro difesa, significa che tale organizzazione è ormai fallita. Se addirittura permette di rifornire di armi una delle nazioni più armate al mondo per uccidere donne e bambini che vivono in una striscia di terra senza acqua e cibo, allora significa che tale organizzazione è marcia fino al midollo. L'Unione Europea, altra organizzazione nata per impedire future guerre, invece fa autrice di piani di riarmo e campagne di odio razziale e culturale. Organizzazione che usa perfino lo sport e la cultura per alimentare odio verso il fraterno popolo russo. Un'organizzazione che si permette perfino di alimentare scontri all'interno degli Stati membri, che, come l'Ungheria, osano alzare la testa per garantire al loro popolo condizioni di vita migliori e libertà di scelta. Tutto questo mentre parlano di libertà e democrazia. L'Europa è morta, l'ONU è morta. Il tempo è finito e occorre andare oltre. Dobbiamo andare oltre questa Europa dei ministri forgiati dallo Young Global Leaders, che rinunciano alla neutralità, mera espressione di pace, per abbracciare il sogno della guerra. Guerra venduta come pace, nel segno della più lucida follia orwelliana. Dobbiamo andare oltre le continue presunte emergenze climatiche, sanitarie, finanziarie, capaci di alterare le scelte nazionali in campo agricolo, artigianale, industriale e sociale. Dobbiamo andare oltre quel modello di sviluppo imposto da una cricca di avidi e pervertiti individui, permeati di razzismo e superbia. Di fronte a tutto questo, noi abbiamo l'obbligo morale di costruire una solida e credibile alternativa. Un'alternativa che può e deve partire dalla cultura e dalla cooperazione internazionale. Ispirandoci agli insegnamenti di Socrate e di Platone, dobbiamo realizzare il benessere della comunità e favorire la solidarietà tra i popoli. Dobbiamo costruire un nuovo paradigma da applicare alle società occidentali, che devono abbandonare il principio dell'economia come fulcro della società per rimettere al centro della stessa l'uomo, con le sue complessità materiali e spirituali. Devono essere le differenze e le specificità dei popoli, generati da secoli di storia e culture diverse, a diventare la forza trainante sulla quale fare leva per generare un dialogo costruttivo per la convivenza pacifica e l'arricchimento reciproco. Un dialogo che porti ad un'equa ridistribuzione delle risorse del pianeta, sul quale tutti viviamo, risorse però che spesso sono causa di scontri armati e violenze inaudite per la criminale volontà di concentrarle nelle mani di pochi individui. Per realizzare tutto questo non bastano le parole, non servono gli slogan. L'ENAC, l'Ente Nazionale Attività Culturali, di cui sono fiero di rappresentare, organizzerà in Italia il secondo forum della cultura italiana. Un momento di confronto tra coloro che desiderano rimettere l'uomo al centro della comunità e l'economia al suo servizio, come strumento per il suo accrescimento spirituale e materiale e non come fine ultimo. Un'occasione importante per creare rapporti sinergici tra realtà di nazioni e continenti differenti, ma accomunati da una visione nuova e differente. È necessario da subito realizzare una rete mondiale di tutte le forze nazionali e popolari che non accettano i dogmi del pensiero unico liberista. Se riusciremo a costruire una rete vasta e credibile, capace di attrarre consensi e nuove adesioni, saremo in grado di rappresentare quelle istanze sociali, morali e di salvaguardia dei popoli cui l'ONU è venuto meno, soprattutto in questi ultimi anni. Può sembrare difficile, un azzardo, una follia, ma nulla è impossibile. Se ci crediamo, ci possiamo riuscire. Dopo Berlino, dove lo Schiller Institut ha dimostrato ancora una volta quanto importante sia il lavoro di squadra, vi invito a Roma. Accanto ai numerosi dibattiti nazionali, realizzeremo un incontro specifico per lanciare un'idea, l'idea di un'organizzazione mondiale della cultura. La cultura come chiave per scardinare l'ordine dominante e dare ai popoli un futuro diverso. La cultura come strumento di coesione e cooperazione internazionale. Vi aspettiamo a Roma nel mese di novembre per realizzare insieme questo sogno. Grazie.
Ja, vielen Dank, Maurizio. Ich denke, ist ein Mann mit Vision.
Thank you very much, Maurizio. I think he's a man with visions. Thank you very much. Next, we will hear from, now we go to the youth part of the panel. Now we will hear Martin Kaptein. He lives in Holland, but he has Russian origins, and now he will speak about the necessity.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh,
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
I'm sorry.
One speaker who is also young still,
First, we will have a speaker who's still young, but not quite as young as Martin. This is Mr. Nielsen. He's a very famous Russian expert from expert for Russia from Denmark, and he will speak about the importance of Russian culture and why.
Yeah, it works, doesn't it? Yeah, it works just as well. Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. And I would also like to thank Schiller Institute, you, Helga, especially also for inviting me and talking about Russian culture, because in my own home country, which is Denmark, I was fired for talking about Russian culture. 2022, I was supposed to give a lesson about Dostoevsky. It was cancelled, and subsequently I was fired for this. So you can see I'm very glad here in Berlin I have the possibility to talk about Russian culture. I was first time in Russia in 1982. Brezhnev was still alive, so I know Russian culture very well. I worked there, lived there for many years. I have personal Russian. My wife is Russian, by the way, and I know it quite well. And I would like to, in 10 minutes, to introduce you to Russian culture. It's impossible. Of course, it's totally impossible, mission impossible. Like Tom Cruise, I'm doing it anyway. So of course, I may miss some details about Russian culture, but let's see here. It'll basically be about, just a minute. Yes, here we are. It will not be about politics, but about culture, but still, you can see who we have here, Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan in the White House, we are in 1984, and he invited Susanna Masia. She was an expert of Russian culture, and he wanted to have her speak 5 minutes about Russian culture. It was even less than mine, but it turned out, to be much, much more, because 5 minutes, you can see here, he wanted 5 minutes, but in the first time, it turned 4 or 5 hours, and then it was 22 times. White House. Massey was not a diplomat. She didn't use dry language and things like that. She used personal experience, her love for Russian culture, and somehow it touched some spots at Reagan. It's interesting, I think. And she wrote a book about it, and she actually wrote that Reagan was curious and humble. Who would believe that? Anyway, how it was, and I also think it paved the way for the Reykjavik summit in 1986, and INF treaty also in 1987 with Gorbachev. And you can see here, it's Gorbachev to the right, and Reagan, they're having a good time. And we are talking about the Cold War. Here we have Nixon and Brezhnev in the 1970s. Two elderly people have a good time at the seaside. But something happened after the fall of the Berlin Wall. You can see here. So something happened. It's another lecture, I think, for several years. Something happened, and even today, yes, Trump tried to talk with Putin. We are not sure what it's about, but they are not talking at all to Putin, have no connections. And I think it's horrible that we don't have this connection. It's horrible that we don't have any interest in Russian culture. At least it goes for my country. So Russian culture, briefly, you can see we're talking about a very big country. You can see on the map, it has borders. It borders to Alaska, by the way, and to Finland and Eastern Europe. And Russian, what is Russian? They have actually two adjectives for Russian. We have Ruski, and we have Rossiyski. Ruski is the Russian language, Ruski язык. Rossiyski is Российская Федерация, Russian Federation. The difference is that Ruski is about Russian language and Russian ethnic. Rossiyski, it's about all those peoples who live there. It's for people who not have Russian as a first language. So there is a difference there. What are we talking about? And European, yes, what is European? I think we can have a conference for 2 days at least to define, is it European culture today? No, what is European culture today? I'm not quite sure about it. There is a classic definition. We talked about that several times. And we have the universal human dimension, which we talked about. In Russia, we have 119 ethnic national groups. But yeah, it's many, and we have more than 100 languages. So it's a civilization. It's a world. They also sometimes Russian would talk about Russia as Ruski Mir, the Russian world, which it is, and it make it difficult to talk in 10 minutes about Russian culture. Here we have Kalmyk. It's the only Buddhist country in Europe. They're living close to the Caspian Sea, and here we have Tatars, 800 kilometers east of Moscow, and you can see they're praying. They're Muslims, and they speak a language related to Turkish. But if we go to history, where it differs the most, then we have to talk about the Orthodox Church, which is very, very important and always been very important. Even Susanna Masia told Reagan about the Russians, said many Russians are actually religious. They're not really communist. They have to be communist, but they are not real communist. They are very much attached to the Orthodox Church. It also, in the Second World War, when the tanks beat the Germans, they had icons and they prayed also for the tanks, even though it was a Soviet country. So what is it? We have an empire called the Byzantine Empire, which is basically Turkey, Greek, Balkan, some Middle East countries, Egypt, Syria, what's Palestine, things like that. It lasted for more than 1,000 years. And it was a frame for the Orthodox faith, protected. The Orthodox faith was protected by Byzantine Empire. Collapsed in 1453, and then Russia took the torch. Russia took on the role as protector of the Orthodox believers in the Middle East and the Balkans. So it means that Russia has some special relations to Greece, to Serbia, even to Arab countries. I can tell you a story. In some years back, I went to Sharm el-Sheikh. I had a program. I would like to trace the Russian culture, Orthodox culture, from Egypt all the way up to the almost to the northern pole, to Russia and things like that. The first time I went to an Arab Orthodox or Coptic church, is very close to the Russian church. I started to speak English. No one understood it. What about German? Nein, auch nicht. Then I tried to learn my French. No. Then I tried Russian. Bingo, bullseyes. They were speaking Russian. I was speaking Russian with Christians at the Ritzi. It was very interesting, and they had said we have had connection to Russia for almost 500-600 years, things like that. So, yes, you can see, if you forgot about, the Christianity, in Europe we are supposed to be Christians, but, if we see from the tree beginning, the church was one, and then we split in 1054 in the Byzantine Orthodox and the Roman Catholic, and subsequently in 1518 it was a Protestant church, where the culture I come from. And here you can see the red is Orthodox, Greece, you have Bulgaria, Romania, Serbia, Macedonia, and things like that, and Georgia, and you have also some spots in the Middle East. Here we have, from the Byzantine Empire to Moscow, came Theophanos the Greek, and he painted this icon. And icons play an enormous role in Russia, and also in Serbia, in Romania, Bulgaria, countries like that. And he was a Greek monk. And if you are about to paint an icon, you should remember the reverse perspective. I will show you a little what it means. Reverse perspective. You can see here, in contrast to Renaissance painters, the figures in icons cast no shadow, do not reflect physical reality, and are not intended to do so. For some of the rest, it would seem primitive. Where are the shadows which Rembrandt played with? Where are perspectives with the Renaissance painters used? No, it's nowhere, and it's not intended to do. Icons show transfigured characters closer to God, and they are relating to a kind of divine reality. And icons look at you. If you ask Serbians, Romanians, Russians, they will say, if you have an icon, they look at you. So it means a lot, because I say it's seen as primitive in the West. Here we have in Russia, one of the first pupils of Theophan Gregg was Andrei Rublev, Old Testament Trinity. I have seen it many times in the Tretyakov galleries in Moscow, and every time I stand before it, I have no words. You're not supposed to have words. You're supposed to look and be looked at from this. And you can try it several times. In the beginning, I was a very hardcore atheist. I'm a very hardcore. I didn't believe it's this kind of stuff. But eventually, I saw several times it works for me. And here we have also, it's Dionysius, another painter, religious painter, Resurrection. And here, what we have here, it's an Arab icon. You can see this culture is also a part of the Arab culture. As one of the from aggregations in Egypt, I talked to and say, we Christians were here first. Then after 500 years, Islam came here. So you can also meet it here. Here we have the Renaissance perspective. You can see perspectives like we teach are taught in school. And below you have the icon perspective. And here we have the Renaissance perspective. It's very obvious here. So Renaissance, the human being at the center. Because the self perspective, the word self became in the Renaissance became very, very central concept. Liberation from authority. We just heard Lyndon LaRouche, he spoke about the Renaissance. Liberation from authority, especially church, and toward free thought, science, things like that. The Renaissance also had some negative aspects. And it's seen from the Orthodox, from the East. They can see there are some negative aspects, including hubris, and overconfidence in human potential and a disregard for limits, condescending attitudes, and weaponizing, liberalism, weaponizing Renaissance, weaponizing the philosophy of enlightenments. This will be up to, because I'm very much in favor of the Renaissance and philosophy of enlightenment, but I can also see how it's been misused, I would say, today from today's politicians who use it as a weapon against other countries. It's just what I said. The Orthodox perspective, humble approach to existence. You're not in the center. The individual is not seen as a central reference point, not the center of the universe. God is. There's a tendency in the West, in the East, they will look at the West with a critical eye, perceiving it as arrogant, condescending, and dismissive of other alternative worldviews. There's a Russian word for all this. We call it hubris. In Russian, they have two words for pride. One is gordost. The other one is what I read here, гордыня. Гордыня is something Russian would say if a person is too much, too self-assured. He only can see one aspect of things, one aspect of a situation. It's hubris. Okay, here I have Vasily Kandinsky. Why do I show him here? We are talking about orthodoxy. Why are we showing Kandinsky? Yeah, why? Here we have him, Vasily Kandinsky. He started as an icon painting. He was taught to paint icons in the beginning. Secondly, he moved to Berlin in 1911 and started the Blaue Reiter, the Blue Reiter. So you can see a picture there down in the corner. And he was in the avant-garde. He was a very advanced modernist painter at this time, coming from humble origins, and he went into Bauhaus. It was also an artist organization in Germany. Then came Hitler. He didn't like Hitler. He went to Paris, where he died eventually. Pioneer of abstract arts. He had Finno-Ugrian roots. Finno-Ugrian are also part of Russia. Here you can see a map. You have the Finnish, Estonians, Hungarians. But you have Moska, Mari, Udmurt, Kansi, Komi, Manse. You have a lot of Finno-Ugrian cultures and languages. So you can see Russia is many ways suited to deal with the world, because they have Muslims, they have all kinds of cultures, they have a lot of connections they had for centuries, by the way. Helga, I got it. Folk culture in Russia, here we have it, just to have some pictures. How many minutes do I have, Helga? 2 minutes, okay. Yeah, okay, I'll speed talk. We have Renaissance, philosophy, Enlightenment came to Russia, education, art, ballet. So we had two centers, the 18th century, 19th centuries, where Renaissance, Enlightenment, philosophy, Enlightenment came to Russia. And this is St. Petersburg. So it's also European. It's Orthodox, it's also European. They have contact to Muslims. They have contact to all kinds of people, Buddhist people, you name it. Just 19th century culture, it's explosion of literature, painting. I think most people will know this. I just, I can't, I'm sorry, it'll be another time. I will show you this. Okay, I'll show you this. This one. It's a very interesting painting by Vasily Vereshchagin from the 19th century. And he was a painter of the wars, the imperial wars in Central Asia. He was also of Russian and Tatar origin. So you can see many. There were also, Vereshchagin was also of mixed origin, Tatar and Russian origin. And you can see here what his opinion about it was a very, very interesting painting. Yes, I'll just finish by saying, that Russia has so many experiences. So I think, for us in Europe to close the door to Russia, we shoot ourselves in the foot, because there are so many experiences. There are so many. They are well suited, to deal with Muslims, with Asians, and other countries. And Europeans, we have to get out. I mean, and Europeans, we have to understand, that history is not a one-way road, which we are decided by the West. My take here is that civilizational approach, where every civilization has its own road, it's where we go, because if we think there's only one way, we are thinking like the Marxist-Leninists in the previous. They also thought there was one way to communism. Now they think there's one way to the liberal society, whatever that is. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Jens.
Thank you very much, Jens. That was obviously very fascinating, that you wish to have a whole conference on that subject. We hope that we have the freedom of dialogue encouraged again. So I hope we will not be incarcerated because of your speech. And if we hope, and we can hope that this can be continued. Vielen Dank. Thank you very much. Now we come to what I had announced already. The young people of this panel, Martin Kaptein, who is living in Dutch in Holland, but is Russian origin, and he will talk about the role of music for young people, and also the piano will play a big role there. Please, Martin.
Ladies and gentlemen, today I'd like to talk about the meaning of life. Well, actually, I'd like to talk about piano playing and why it's so important. And my job today, this presentation, will be to convince you that there is an actual connection between the search for the meaning of life and playing the piano. So, without further ado, I only have 10 minutes. Let's get started. Once upon a time, one of my students, I should introduce myself, I'm the pianist and I'm also a piano teacher. I have almost 50 students right now. And once upon a time, one of my students asked me, why do I have to play piano? Why do I have to do that with that exact expression? I was thinking about that, and then my first instinct was to tell him, just practice, just don't ask questions like that. But then I thought, actually, it's a very good question. So I told him, actually, you'll become a better person if you do that. Yeah, and he looked at me like a little bit like this. He looked at me like this, and then I started explaining. Well, you will become a better. You'll become a better person. Do you want actually to explore and to understand this world as much as possible? He said, well, I guess so. Yes, I do want to understand this world as much as possible. And then I started explaining, well, everything we see, everything we experience, everything we hear and touch, it all happens in our brain, right? So if you play, well, he looked at me like this. He was a quite smart student, so he started to see already where I was going with my argumentation. So I told, well, when you play piano, you read sheet music, you play, you interpret, you listen, you feel. So all of these things are happening in your brain. So essentially you're giving yourself an upgrade. And since we perceive everything in our brains, that means that a whole new world will open up. So that's the short version. So I told him, just keep going and you will actually see that. So I'd like to take this opportunity to talk about the piano, specifically about all the benefits of piano playing. And to start about the benefits of piano playing, I will not start with the piano. I'll actually start with the voice. I'll start with singing, specifically singing at the piano. So the piano is a very strange instrument. And as a matter of fact, it's a percussive instrument, right? You are hitting strings with hammers. And the goal is to play the piano as if one were singing. That's a very, very difficult thing to achieve, actually, even on a professional level, because sound, well, it's hitting a string. So all the sounds are separated, and we have to create a sense of cohesion, right? And that's very difficult thing to do, because we have to do it through other means, through means of very subtle changes of loudness or timing. And that's very, very difficult to do. So essentially what we as pianists are doing is to translate this idea of singing, because singing is very natural to everyone. Most people, at least, they can sing quite well, and they can phrase as well. But when you start to play piano, it's very, very difficult. Most people just hit notes like it were a keyboard, but it isn't. So essentially what we're doing is we are translating some intuitive knowledge we have, we're translating that into conscious actions, because after all, you have to play piano somehow. So that has to be translated somehow. So that's one of the biggest benefits with piano playing. But, well, working? No. Well, I had a video, but I'll skip that for now, if it will work. Well, yes, like I was saying, we are creating cohesion. And in fact, right now, we are also creating a sense of cohesion, right? We are having presentations, we are having like these little bits of knowledge, but our job is to connect all of these bits and to create a coherent worldview. So that's why. And you might say, all right, I'm convinced, I want to practice piano. I'd say, well, just wait a moment. There is much, much more to piano playing. Right? I was just talking about melody, right? About the singing part. But when you play the piano specifically, you're playing with both hands. Most of the time, the right hand plays the melody, but the left hand plays the harmony. And harmony is like a parallel universe to a melody. Harmony moves according to its very own rules. So harmony it's really like a parallel universe. So when you play piano, you are having this dual awareness. You're focused on two very, very different things at the same time, which is intellectually quite difficult. So what is harmony? Harmony is this set of very complicated rules. These rules which were followed by all the great composers, Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, Haydn. And these things, they don't always move together with the harmony. They are creating dissonances which solve into more consonant chords, or dissonances that solve somewhere else. So it's really like a parallel universe. By the way, this is a fragment from from a Bach chorale, which is called Alle Menschen müssen sterben, all people have to die. You see the analysis there, all these little Roman numbers, which is very complicated. But even children have this intuitive understanding, all right, this harmony doesn't sound well, it wants to move somewhere else. So essentially, once more, we are translating this intuition of harmony into conscious knowledge. I, as a piano teacher, that's my job to explain all of that, right? And one more aspect is the form. When you play the piano, you tend to play longer pieces. Like sometimes pieces can take 15 minutes, sometimes 20 minutes, sometimes even 30 minutes without any breaks, right? And a piece cannot be just like a collection of notes. No, a piece has to be built. There is an architecture to a piece, and this is called the form. Right here you see one of the most perfected forms of music, in my opinion, that has ever been conceived, the sonata form, the classical sonata form used by Mozart extensively, by Beethoven as well. So when you are playing, you have to keep the big architecture of the piece in your mind at the same time. So you have to know where you are, as do we in life. We have to know the position we are in, and we don't have the benefit of knowing when our lives will be over. but we have to know, and based on that, we have to make certain choices. So it is really a metaphor for life. One last beautiful thing about piano playing is that there is this physicality of it, right? You have these low notes and the high notes. So essentially, when you're playing piano, it's like your very own orchestra in black and white, right? And even some pieces can be viewed as orchestral pieces. Where you have different instruments, you're imitating them. So essentially, you're a conductor, you're your very own conductor, and you're promoting this this sense of responsibility for the orchestra, in quotes, which we're playing on. So this fits very beautifully with the idea of Schiller, right? You have this idea of form and the idea of sense. And it is combined with the piano. It is combined in a very perfect way. So it's combined and is synthesized into the into spielen, to play, right? So when we are synthesizing the outside forms and this form of like the melody being an emotional thing, that is when we are alive. I would very quickly want to glance over this process of teaching. These are some young, I think, Russian students I was teaching some years ago. Was not really a planned lesson, just improvising. But I view the piano not only as a place to study, but also a place for concentration and a place for exploration, a place for freedom, where we can encourage the young people to make conscious choices, to explore the possibilities, of interpretation. Since we do not want to create copies of other people, we want to create really free people. And at the piano, you can rehearse that part. This is one of my Chinese students. You can see how focused he is. I am teaching him online. He's from Beijing. Some of my theory students, I teach them on Saturdays and Sundays when I have free time. So yes, there was a video. I'll skip that as well, if it will let me. Will it? Yes, one of my students shared a very beautiful story, which I'd really like to share with you. It's very short. She said, well, actually, when I come home, it's a beautiful thing. I have a piano there. It's a little bit like a pet. It is waiting for me. And I can be really tired, but the pet is happy. As is the piano, which is a very strange thing. It's just wood and strings and metal. Yet when you're tired and you start to play the piano, suddenly like a transformation takes place. You feel yourself more centered, more balanced. And I think nowadays the problem is we do need to create this sense of balance, because to create fully free people who are capable of making their own choices, people have to find a sense of inner harmony and inner balance. And I think music is a very important and beautiful way to do that. So we come back to this original question, why do I have to play piano? Of course, the answer is you don't have to play piano if you really don't want to. No one's forcing you. But if you do, you'll really become a free person. Like in this sense, playing piano becomes a sort of rehearsal for life, this combination between form and sense. So one last sentence just to close up. The responsibility of a teacher, of course, is very important, as our historical teachers. So a teacher has this influence over a student, right? We can close a human soul. We can make people afraid to play piano, but we can also open up a new human being to let them explore and find their very own way. I'm a very big fan of the Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu, who had this concept of teaching without teaching, in a certain sense of finding a very natural way to teach a person, to let this person get on their own path, as opposed to a forced path. So thank you very much for listening to my short presentation. I hope I've convinced some of you to explore taking piano lessons, or some of you who already play an instrument, because of course this applies to other instruments as well. I'm not discriminating here. To see music as really as a tool for a better life and to approach this harmony. Thank you.
Vielen Dank. Dank, Martin. Also, du
Thank you
hast
very
jetzt
much,
wahrscheinlich
Martin.
viele neue Schüler
You have
bald.
most likely many new pupils.
Now we go. Jetzt gehen wir zu
Now,
Anastasia
now we go to
Sie
Anastasia
ist
Battle.
aus
She
Amerika vom
is
Schiller
from USA,
Institut. Sie ist auch
from the
die
Schiller Institute. She is also
Co-Initiatorin
the
der
co-initiator of the
Internationalen
International Peace
Friedenskoalition. Sie moderiert jeden Freitag.
Coalition.
Ich kann Sie nur alle
She
bitten,
is
wenn
moderating
Sie
each Friday. I
Anastasia
can
jeden Freitag
just
erleben wollen, 17 Uhr
tell
einschalten.
you if you want to see Anastasia
Und
each
sie ist
Friday,
auch die
come on
Chefredakteurin einer sehr wichtigen
at
Kulturzeitschrift
5 p.m.
in
And she's also the
Amerika,
editor
Leonore. Das ist die
editor-in-chief
Schwesterzeitschrift einer sehr
of
wichtigen
a
deutschen
very
Kulturzeitschrift. Die ist
cultural
riesengroß.
magazine
das
in
Wort.
USA, which is Leonore, which is the
Thank you.
sister magazine of a very important publication here in Germany, which is
Excuse me,
Ibicus.
I will be speaking English. I'm very sorry. I promise next time I'm here, I will take a number of courses and I'll speak better German. So I've been here in Berlin for the last 2 weeks. And in many of my conversations I've had with the German people here in Berlin, one of the biggest questions that I've gotten just over and over again, people say, can we really change the world? And to me, this is a really understandably cautious question, especially given what's happened here in Germany. It's colored by a lot of tension, and you can hear a little bit of hope and frustration in people. And as I was looking at people's very painful expression as they're asking this to me, I realized that this really is the nation that bore the children of Friedrich Schiller and Ludwig von Beethoven. And that's why these people were feeling that anguish. And I truly believe that if the German people and people generally, as you're seeing throughout this conference, if we embrace our classical heritage, that we can strengthen our souls and respond for the good, as Martin was describing, actually. I just want to make sure that everyone who feels this kind of anguish knows that they're not alone, as you're finding here in this audience today. So I'd like to go to the first slide. In an article called The Death Agony of Olympus, Lyndon LaRouche describes this process of tension. He says, when one experiences a terribly perplexing sense of shock, the indispensable first step towards a fruitful peace of mind is the victim's successful identification of the source of personal inner tension, which has prompted that sense of shock. In other words, one must ask, what is the problem? Those who are most likely to find the kind of peace of mind the present crisis requires are to be met among those persons who have at least some degree of literate familiarity with classical tragedy on stage. Indeed, the political importance of classical tragedy on stage is that since Sophocles and Aeschylus, it was a form of art crafted to the purpose of provoking living audiences the impassioned intellectual sources of insight and renewed moral strength needed to deal successfully with precisely the relevant type of shock. Now, a very powerful example of this use of classical theater and music is Beethoven's opera Fidelio. This opera is based on a true story of the imprisoned American Revolutionary War hero, Marquis de Lafayette, and his wife, Adrienne. Under orders from the British Prime Minister William Pitt, Lafayette was held in solitary confinement in the Austrian prison Olmütz from 1792 to 1797. It was Adrienne who never gave up looking for her husband, and when she found him in 1795, she stayed in the prison with her children and caused an international uproar, which then freed Lafayette in 1797. Now, Beethoven was moved in 1804 after Napoleon was crowned emperor to write this opera. People recognized that he had originally made a dedication to Napoleon. He had faith that Napoleon was going to do something different, and that clearly was not the case. So Beethoven, too, also had hopes in a political leader who then betrayed him. But how did he respond? In the Fidelio opera, Florestan is held as a political prisoner, locked away in solitary confinement by an evil governor, Pizarro. Leonore is Florestan's devoted wife and arrives at the prison in disguise as a young man named Fidelio. She's hired and begins working as a prison assistant, and Leonore gains the trust of Rocco, the head prisoner guard, who tells her about a secret dungeon which holds a prisoner in solitary confinement for 2 years. Pizarro soon arrives and learns that the minister is making a surprise visit to the prison. He quickly pulls Rocco aside, tells him about the secret prisoner and that he must soon be killed, buried, and covered up. The deed must be covered up, and he offers him lots of gold to cover up this deed. Leonore hears about this murder in Act 1, Scene 6, and she says, "You monster! Where will you go? What have you planned in cruel fury? The call of pity, the voice of mankind, will nothing move your tiger's wrath? Though surge like ocean's wave, ire and anger in your heart, a rainbow on my path still shines, which brightly rests on somber clouds. It looks so calmly, peacefully at me, of happier days reminding me, and soothes thus my troubled heart. Come, hope. Let not the last bright star in my anguish be obscured. Light up my goal, however far. Through love, I shall still reach it. I follow my inner calling. Waver I shall not. Strength I derive from faithfulness and love. O you, from whom I bore so much, if I could penetrate where malice has imprisoned you and bring to you sweet comfort, follow my inner calling. Waver I shall not. Strength I derive from faithfulness and love." Leonore's resolve to find and save her husband is incredibly strong and resolute. As she's working at the prison, she takes notice of the conditions of all of the prisoners and organizes to have them allowed out in the courtyard to see the sun for just a moment. All but the secret prisoner is allowed out. In this very beautiful moment, it's very sorrowful, but it's beautiful watching these prisoners come out into the courtyard, and they sing. They say, "Oh, what joy in the open air, freely to breathe again! Up here alone is life, the dungeon is a grave. We shall with all our faith trust in help of God. Hope whispers softly in my ears. We shall be free, we shall find peace. O heaven, salvation, happiness, O freedom, will you be given us? Speak softly, be on your guard. We are watched with eye and ear." In Act 2, we go down to the dungeon to Florestan, our secret prisoner, mostly starved to death and with no human contact. He says, "God, what darkness is this? What terrifying silence? I'm living in a desert. Death only reigns down here. How hard my trials. But just as the Lord's pleasure, I don't complain. What I've to suffer, you decree. In the spring days of my life, happiness deserted me. Truth I dare to utter boldly, and the chains are my reward. Willingly I bear my tortures, and in ignominy my life. To my heart this sweet solace, My duty I have always done. And do I not feel soft whispering air? What brightness shines on my grave? I see now an angel, fragrant like a rose, comforting stands by my side. An angel, Leonore, my wife so alike, to lead me to freedom, to the kingdom of God. Florestan, despite the hardships that he has gone through for 2 years in solitary confinement, he still has not given in to despair and finds the strength to fight. Leonore is brought down to the dungeon to assist with the murder. She sees the prisoner but cannot make out his face and has not discovered his true identity. While digging Florestan's grave, her own husband, she says, "By God, his prey you shall not be. I surely will undo your chains and make you free, you poor, poor man." Leonore's quality of agapic love is incredible and gives her the courage to risk her life to save an unknown prisoner, even before she knows that this is her husband. Eventually, she does discover that this is in fact her husband, Florestan, and that soon the minister will arrive. Pizarro, knowing that this is about to happen, descends to the dungeon to commit the murder. Just as Pizarro is about to attack Florestan, Leonore stands between them and says, "Pierced you must first my heart. Death I have sworn to you for your murderous mind. Kill first his wife." Pizarro, shocked and thinking he can easily overcome a woman, prepares to kill them both. Leonore reveals a pistol and points it at Pizarro, stopping him and saving Florestan. The minister arrives very soon, and the horns can be heard. Beethoven brings this joyous reunion of Florestan and Leonore into the final scene with the minister, where all things come to light, and Leonore gets to remove Florestan's shackles. And the prisoners and everyone who's been part of this process are singing very joyously with the minister. They sing, "Celebrate in joyous measure Leonore's noble courage. Whoever has possessed such a partner of his heart, let him join in our jubilee. Never can the praise be too loudly sounded of the wife that is the preserver of her husband. Having succeeded in delivering you from captivity, loving and beloved, loudly let it be proclaimed, Florestan is again mine own. Whoever has possessed such a partner in his heart, let him join in our jubilee." I just want to close with this. It was a very beautiful part. In Schiller's theater as a moral institution in 1784, he says, "The theater is the common channel through which the light of wisdom streams down from the thoughtful, better part of society, spreading thence in mild beams throughout the entire state. More correct notions, more refined precepts, pure emotions flow from here into the veins of the population. The clouds of barbarism and gloomy superstition disperse. Night yields to triumphant light." The effect of agapic love for your fellow man must set the standard for your actions to be sublime. This is Beethoven's answer to the crisis he faced, to provoke the courageous actions despite his own fears and others' fears. This is the greatest political action you can take at this very moment. And I want to challenge you to pick up Beethoven's Torch. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Anastasia. Du hast es
Thank you,
natürlich
Anastasia. You are very tricky that you build up your speech that I didn't dare to interrupt you in time. Thank you. Now we hear from a special guest from Mexico. She has come here from far away. She's the leader of our youth movement in Mexico and Latin America. I am greeting Carolina Dominguez.
Da wir keine Übersetzung von Spanisch auf Deutsch haben, muss Dennis Small konsekutiv übersetzen. Oh, wonderful, wunderbar. Okay. Bitte.
Buenas tardes. Me alegra mucho estar aquí con ustedes en una conferencia que ha sido optimista e inspiradora. El economista estadounidense Lyndon LaRouche planteó la idea de una misión unificada.
Are you not hearing the interpretation?
Okay, now we can hear you, Carlos.
Oh, would you rerun it, please? I'm so sorry.
Again. Buenas tardes. Me alegra mucho estar
Again,
aquí con todos
good
ustedes en
afternoon.
una conferencia que
I'm
ha
very
sido muy
happy to be
optimista e
here with all of you
inspiradora.
at a conference that has been very optimistic
Economista
and
estadounidense
inspiring.
Lyndon LaRouche
The American
planteó la
economist Lyndon
idea
LaRouche proposed the idea
de una misión
of
unificada.
a unified mission,
La creación de un
the
movimiento
creation
social
of a social movement
particularmente formada de jóvenes.
made up primarily of
Este
young people.
movimiento debía ser
This movement
necesariamente internacional,
would have to be
cuya educación
international.
estuviera basada en dominar
Its
conceptos
education would be
profundos
based on
sobre
mastering
la
profound
naturaleza bondadosa
concepts
del hombre,
about
la creatividad,
man's
la ciencia, el
good
arte,
nature,
el
creativity,
estadismo como
science,
cualidades
art,
agápicas, y sobre
agapic
todo
statecraft,
basada en
and
la
above
mejora
all,
del individuo
based on
como
the
el
betterment
producto de
of the
ser
individual
partícipe de
as a
esa
result
misión.
of participating in that
Todos
mission.
serían aceptados.
All
Nadie
were
sería
to be
rechazado,
accepted,
a pesar de ser
none
estudiantes
rejected,
de
even
sociología,
if they are
de
students of
ingeniería ambiental,
sociology,
matemáticas, y
environmental engineering,
particularmente no juzgarían a los
mathematics.
economistas. Todos tenemos defectos y cometemos
Even
errores.
economists would not be judged,
Así,
since we
se
all
fueron
have flaws
creando
and
diferentes
make mistakes.
generaciones de
Thus,
jóvenes hasta ahora.
different generations of youth
Quiero
movements
compartir
have
más
been
que una
created to
presentación,
date.
el resultado de
I
un
want to
proceso
share with you
activo de
not so
trabajo
much
en
a
equipo
presentation,
sobre
but
nuestra
rather the results of
campaña
a living
LaRouche en las
process of teamwork
universidades. ¿Qué es
about our
realmente el poder?
campaign, LaRouche in the
Lanzamos
universities.
esta
What is
campaña
power,
con el
really?
objetivo de impulsar
We
y
launched this
continuar
campaign
la misión
a few years ago
unificada
with the aim of
de la
promoting
creación de un
and
movimiento
continuing the
internacional de
unified mission
jóvenes,
of
ahora que es más
creating an
necesario que
international
nunca.
youth movement,
Esta campaña
now
ha
more
ido
necessary
cobrando
than
más
ever.
vida y dirección
This
a lo que
campaign
ahora llamamos
has been gaining
LaRouche en las
strength and is
universidades,
focusing now on what we call
jóvenes por la paz
LaRouche
y el
in the
desarrollo, que es
universities,
realmente el poder.
Youth for Peace and Development. What is
Yo
power,
sé
really?
que esto se
I
oye
know
muy bien.
this sounds
Jóvenes
great.
trabajando en equipo por la
Young
paz.
people working
Pero,
together
¿cómo lo
for
logras?
peace. But how do you
Bueno,
achieve
pues
this?
aquí
Well,
es donde empieza el trabajo,
this is
lo que
where
a
the
mí me
work
gusta
begins.
llamar
What I
ensuciarse las
like
manos.
to call getting your hands
Aquí
dirty.
empieza lo que LaRouche
This
llamaba
is
el
where
experimento
what LaRouche
único
called
que
the
demuestra
unique
que la
experiment
hipótesis es
that
correcta y
proves the
puede seguir.
hypothesis is correct and you can
¿Cuál es la
continue.
hipótesis?
What is our
Que el poder
hypothesis?
son las ideas.
That power is ideas. Ideas that lead an international movement whose goal is to achieve peace and development. Here you can see some of the work we're doing on university campuses, particularly supporting the openings for development that BRICS represents as part of the optimism in the global South. We are taking our proposals to BRICS events where people from China and Russian embassies participated. Here, we are participating in conferences at the most important universities in Mexico on the subject of BRICS and the OASIS plan. We reached more than 350 young people in person in just 2 conferences. In the photo, you can see the Spanish language brochure we have about the OASIS plan. That same week, we held a conference via Zoom attended by people from more than 6 countries, including Colombia, Equatorial Guinea, Argentina, Chile, Mexico, United States, Bolivia, and Ecuador, among others. Here, what I've already described is applied to what we do in universities, but now for this conference, the development of strategic areas to achieve peace. Here, we are rehearsing the songs that were sung at the conference by the university choir with conductor Angelica, who continues the bel canto tradition of Maestro Biano. I would also like to mention that pianist Laura Flores arranged 2 of the songs we sang and composed the other 2, including Ceasefire and Lullaby for a Child in Gaza. We are coordinating here all of this with Her Excellency Ambassador Belle Rose Sisulu of South Africa. How did we meet her? How did we meet the ambassador? Well, by looking her up. Just like that, looking for her. So it was a meeting with her to invite her to the meetings of the International Peace Coalition. And if to be honest, we were surprised that she agreed to receive us. We spoke with her and began a relationship based on ideas that continues to grow to this day. Incidentally, Ambassador Sisulu's father was Mandela's right-hand man and also did time in jail. What the ambassador has in her hands is our English language brochure on the OASIS plan. This is my favorite picture. It's very special because it represents something very valuable. And I'll tell you why. The academic authorities at the university did not want to receive the ambassador because they said that we had not invited them to the event. Which is really ridiculous because they had the document announcing the event several days before. And they had authorized the event officially. I got very nervous and embarrassed with the ambassador, and suddenly I thought, can we come up with someone important to receive her? Then Saul and Alejandro from the campus student committee told me, well, we will receive her. We, young students, and you from the Schiller Institute can receive her. What better reception than by we young people concerned about the future? And this is what happened. That's why you won't see anyone, quote, important in the picture. Simply just simple human beings. As you can see, we don't have, nor do we function on the basis of connections or special favors. This photo is the proof. We had the presentation of the choir, a message from the founder of the Schiller Institute, Helga LaRouche, the speech by the ambassador, and finally, videos that we had prepared. But I'll tell you a secret. When we did all the AV, the audio tests, everything worked fine. But during the event, believe it or not, we had serious technical problems with the videos. I'd like to read to you a small part of the ambassador's message. She quoted what Nelly Pandor, former South African Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, between 2019 and 2024, and currently chair of the Nelson Mandela Foundation, from what she said when she participated at the 89th meeting of the International Peace Coalition held on February 14, 2025. I believe we should have the spirit of Mandela, that freedom is possible, that the Palestinian people will enjoy sovereignty, justice, and freedom. And that the Oasis Plan offers an opportunity to think of the world in a different way. Let us marshal our resources and seize this moment. We must be ambitious and optimistic because Mandela has shown us that things we imagine impossible are indeed possible. Next, please. Esta es una de las canciones que cantamos en la conferencia. This is one of the songs that we sang at the conference. Okay, next, please. Bueno, eso es lo que hacemos. That's what we do. We are normal people, common people, but together we've been able to change things in the world. So if we're clear that we are part of something really very, very big and super important, each one of us and our work has an effect on the whole international dynamic. Perhaps changing the world is not as difficult as you think. There is no secret. How do we do it? By doing it. Doing it. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But you do the work and you start to become a magnet that attracts people who also want to do something more with their lives and not just think about themselves and what will happen to them. So that line, what can I do? I'm just a simple human being, is an excuse not to fight, because right here we have just some of the many simple human beings who play a role in this process. Our international coordinators, interpreters, organizers, people in charge of different sectors and areas of the movement, volunteers, etc., all of us, with a unified mission of creating an international youth movement for peace and development as a legacy of LaRouche, and committed to ensure that his ideas shall not die. On the contrary, today they are more alive than ever. I would like to invite you to participate in this process and to answer for yourselves the question if the real power is the power of ideas. I promise you that you will have fun and that you will have many, many problems to solve. And if you don't believe me, you can ask those who have already participated in this work. So if you want to be in the picture up there and be part of this team, you can coordinate with us in any country. Start getting your hands dirty and get infected by the optimism of the youth of the global South. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Carolina. Ich glaube, dieser Optimismus ist genau das, was wir in Deutschland brauchen. Also wer später bei einem Gruppenfoto machen will, alle so im Bild zu sein, sind eingeladen.
So I think this optimism is exactly what we need in Germany. So maybe we do a group photo later, and people who would like to be in it, be in it. Next speaker is Kynan Thistlethwaite. He is going to speak about Shakespeare and how to overcome sense certainty.
Thank you, Helga. The title of my presentation today is Shakespeare and Sense Perception. It's what you don't see that actually matters. I intend to give a lesson from Shakespeare to help deal with the political, economic, and moral crisis that confronts us today. It's useful to take a step back and actually consider the past 25 years or so of endless imperial wars that have been launched under the guise of protecting human rights and safeguarding international law, which we can all admit now is nothing but a dead letter at this point. General Wesley Clark from the US had famously said in an interview with Amy Goodman in her show Democracy Now! That he was presented with a classified memo in the autumn of 2001, just after 9/11, that proposed a series of regime change wars in 7 countries over the period of 5 years. That list included Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finally finishing off with Iran. When General Clark later asked the same officer a year later about the memo, the officer responded, "Sir, I didn't show you that memo. I did not show it to you." Despite this history that we well know, many were led into believing the so-called evidence of Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction. And now people are being told the exact same narrative about Iran. This kind of mass brainwashing and propaganda is only effective because there is something deeply rooted in the culture of our society, which pushes us to base our judgment on sensational images rather than thought. How can we be cured of our misguided reliance in sense perception? To become efficiently literate and competent on matters of politics, Lyndon LaRouche suggests in his essay, Politics as Art, that one must study the classical works of Shakespeare along with his successor, Schiller, which are not mere works of fiction, but rather the, quote, authentic and inspiring representation of the essence of the specific crises and real history to which these compositions refer. Take Shakespeare's great historical dramas as an example, of which he wrote 8 covering the reigns of England's monarchs, from King John to Henry VIII. The bulk of these plays, covering the reign of Edward III to Henry V, are situated during England's war with France, which lasts 100 years. Shakespeare poses in these plays very compelling questions facing mankind. What is meant by just war? What role does the individual play in shaping history? And how does one construct a lasting, successful modern nation state? In the beginning of the play, Henry V, the chorus appears on stage by appealing to the members of the audience to employ their powers of imagination, as opposed to blindly trusting the senses. What you see takes place in the play, the plot, setting, characters, etc., are all individual elements of the play, but it will not lead you to the unifying idea of the whole. The chorus starts. Oh, for a muse of fire that would ascend the brightest heaven of invention, a kingdom for a stage, princes to act, and monarchs to behold the swelling scene. Then should the warlike Harry, like himself, assume the port of Mars, and at his heels, leashed in like hounds, should famine, sword, and fire crouch for employment. But pardon, gentles all, the flat, unraised spirits that had dared on this unworthy scaffold to bring forth so great an object. Can this cockpit hold the vasty fields of France? Or may we cram within this wooden O the very casks that did affright the air at Agincourt? Oh, pardon, since a crooked figure may attest in little place a million, and let us, ciphers to this great account, on your imaginary forces work. Suppose within this the girdle of these walls are now confined two mighty monarchies, whose high upreared and abutting fronts the perilous narrow ocean parts asunder. Piece out our imperfections with your thoughts. Into 1,000 parts divide one man, and make imaginary puissance. Think, when we talk of horses, that you see them printing their proud hoofs in the receiving earth, for 'tis your thoughts that now must deck our kings, carry them here and there, jumping o'er tines, turning the accomplishment of many years into an hourglass. For the which supply, admit me chorus to this history, who, prologue-like, your humble patience pray, gently to hear, kindly to judge our play. So, you are tasked by Shakespeare to take your thoughts beyond what is presented on the stage. The flat, unraised spirits, as Shakespeare says, who dare to recreate history on this empty stage, must do so with the audience's help and their creative imagination. For Lyndon LaRouche, who thought very highly of this prologue, he had said in one of his papers, The Great Ontological Paradox, quote, "It is there, in Shakespeare's belief in his choice of the form of a belief adumbrated in a sense-perceptual event, that sense perception has been embedded, thus, within the body of the human imagination itself. Such drama might appear to be that which has hidden that truth which is to be located, actually lies embedded in what the putative human observer has mistakenly presumed to have been a direct experience of the merely imagined form of the reality of the specific object observed," end quote. Now, I'd like to elaborate more on this idea of imagination through going through one of Shakespeare's famous plays, The Merchant of Venice, in which this question is given a much fuller treatment. The plot of the play is generally well known. In order to help out his good friend Bassanio, a Catholic Venetian merchant named Antonio borrows money from a Jewish moneylender named Shylock. However, the transaction does not go as simply as one may think, as Shylock lends only under the condition that if Antonio does not fulfill his debt, he must pay with a pound of his own flesh. Unfortunately for Antonio, he ends up being unable to pay back Shylock, who in a fit of rage against the hypocritical Christian society, which treats Judaism with contempt and utter hatred, attempts to exact his revenge against Antonio by extracting his pound of flesh. In the famous court scene of the play, a wealthy heiress named Portia saves the life of Antonio by disguising herself as a man and assuming the role of a lawyer. We'll get to that scene eventually, but let's start off by examining the marriage of Portia to one of her many suitors. Before the play has begun, Portia's father has died without being able to marry her daughter. He has left a very considerable fortune for her daughter and potential suitor, and wants only the very best for her. Since he cannot choose the one his daughter will marry, he has crafted 3 chests for her potential suitor to choose, one in gold, one in silver, and one in lead. One of these chests contained the portrait of Portia, which must be selected by the suitor in order to marry her, otherwise he must promise to never marry again in his whole life. For the gold chest, the message reads, "Who chooseth me shall gain what many men desire." The silver chest, "Who chooseth me shall get as much as he deserves." And for the lead chest, "Who chooseth me must give and hazard all he hath." The skillful Bassanio, not falling for the lure of appearance of the gold and silver chests, instead chooses the lead one, whereas the previous suitors have failed. Inside, he discovers Portia's portrait and the following message: "You that choose not by the view, chance as fair and choose as true. Since this fortune falls to you, be content and seek no new. If you be well pleased with this, and hold your fortune for your bliss, turn you where your lady is, and claim her with a loving kiss." It's clear that Portia's father recognized the most important trait of a man entering into marriage, the idea of taking risks and changing for the better. There's a certain amount of tension one feels when seriously contemplating marriage. There is uncertainty, anxiety about what the future may hold. One cannot see it, hear it, or feel it, but one can certainly have an idea of the future and commit to it. The material benefits one may receive, a greater inheritance, massive wealth, etc., are all vain compared to the profound message in the lead casket. It's also ironic, however, that later in the play, after Portia saves Antonio, Bassanio would actually stumble where he had previously succeeded. In disguise as a lawyer, Portia would ask Bassanio for the ring she had previously told him to never give up, no matter what. Not recognizing Portia, and also feeling a significant amount of gratitude to the doctor of law who just saved his friend's life, Bassanio would give up the ring. Thus, he not only betrays his oath to Portia, but allows himself to become the victim to the deception of appearances. That's just one paradox in the play which Shakespeare left to keep us thinking. And with that in mind, we can now turn to, I think, one of the most beautiful scenes in all of Shakespeare's works, which is the intervention of Portia to save Antonio's life. She's an example of Schiller's beautiful soul, and she is truly invested in the higher principle of the love for humanity and the good, and stands out from her Venetian colleagues, even people like Bassanio and Antonio, which treat Shylock with utter contempt. But she truly has no ulterior motive. She begins by noting that Shylock's claim, under Venetian law, is technically valid. He must, as decreed by law, receive a pound of flesh from Antonio for his failure to repay the debt. However, Portia notes a very important detail, which is the fact that Shylock may only retrieve a pound of flesh and nothing more. In Portia's own words, quote, "The words expressly are, a pound of flesh. Take then thy bond, take thou thy pound of flesh. But in the cutting, if thou dost shed one drop of Christian blood, thy lands and goods are by the laws of Venice confiscate onto the state of Venice." With that, now, Shylock's legal argument has just broken into pieces, just by the literal interpretation of the Decree of Venice. It's quite brilliant, in fact, that Shakespeare does it in this way, and it's by no means a kind of deus ex machina which Shakespeare inserts to create a happy ending. It's actually a lesson in economics and a polemic against empiricism. If a law is unjust, but the author is too careless to specify their implementation, you can use that very law to create a just result. It's only up to your imagination to decide so, especially if your intention is rooted in morality. As LaRouche might say, poetry supersedes mathematics, and the real science of economy is not based on finance, debt, and receiving money, as the economy of Venice, but in the general welfare and sacred value of each human being in society, which Portia intervenes to protect. That's the beauty of Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice. Though we can sympathize with the unjustly treated, yet very much misguided Shylock, who suffers under the divide and conquer strategy of the Venetian Empire, there is a much higher principle of love, humanity, and justice, which is present in Portia's intervention. I'll just end now, since I think I'm coming up on time, on this higher principle of mercy, more properly called agape. And during the court scene, Portia gives this wonderful speech. She says, quote, "The quality of mercy is not strained. It droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. It is twice blessed. It blesseth him that gives and him that takes. 'Tis mightiest in the mightiest. It becomes the throned monarch better than his crown. His scepter shows the force of temporal power, the attribute to awe and majesty, wherein doth sit the dread and fear of kings. But mercy is above this sceptred sway. It is enthroned in the hearts of kings. It is an attribute to God himself. An earthly power doth then show likest God's, when mercy seasons justice." That is how we must act today. As Helga always says, we must be warrior angels for the future and intervene with what Martin Luther King calls agape, in order to change the direction of the world towards the establishment of a new, just security and development architecture. So, with malice towards none, and with charity for all, as President Lincoln would say, let us bind up the wounds of the world. The beautiful chest of great classical works of Shakespeare, Schiller, Rabelais, Erasmus, and Dante will aid us in our work. So, let's not underestimate them.
Vielen Dank, Kynan. Das sind Worte, die ernst
Thank
zu
you,
nehmen
Kynan.
sind.
We have to take your words seriously. And now we're hearing from Ashley Tran. She is from the Schiller Institute in the United States and speaks about Schiller, if I'm correct.
Hi. I first want to thank the Schiller Institute for inviting me to attend and speak at this conference. It is in this environment that I and the people in attendance today can finally breathe and be themselves, freely expressing and thinking on the ills that we face as people of goodwill. In Europe, the political landscape has become violently hostile towards those with dissenting points of view from the mainstream media. Where else in Europe can you go to speak common sense? Definitely not in the Bundestag or the European Commission or among any of what Ray and Helga like to call the coalition of the brain dead. So for cultivating this open atmosphere, we must thank the poet, playwright, and philosopher Friedrich Schiller, the namesake of this organization and conference. Without him, there would be no organization that has dedicated itself towards a commitment to his ideas from over 250 years ago and giving us the opportunity to be here to invoke his spirit. While we are lucky to have this freedom of thought, the rest of Europe currently is under a spell. The so-called democratically elected German Chancellor Merz has led the charge on the rearm Europe policy despite running a campaign promising a reduction in military spending. Merz's recent statements on strengthening Ukraine to not succumb to Russia's tricks, such as calls for negotiations, are reminiscent of the lead up to World War II and the demonization of the Soviet Union to provoke war. Nobody can openly criticize Israel's actions against Palestinians. The country that once hailed artistic and poetic freedom and scientific freedom has vanished. Where did Schiller's Germany go? Friedrich Schiller refused to minimize his mind for the sake of others' smallness, While he was on the path to becoming either a priest or military doctor with the success of his first play, Die Räuber, at the age of 20, he decided to not pursue either path and become a poet. In that vein, the title of Poet of Freedom is very fitting for Schiller. But he was not merely acting upon freedom of individual choice, but a moral impetus, which freed his soul from the chains of tyranny that were brewing in Europe at the time. For his play, which attacks the aristocratic corruption in favor of republicanism, had provoked a heavy censorship campaign from the Duke of Württemberg, Karl Eugen, who banned him from publishing any further works after his immediate success with the publication of the play. To evade the censorship, Schiller fled to smaller states in Germany, trekking through Frankfurt, Leipzig, Dresden, and Weimar, where he made a name for himself as the heart of the German people. I'm grateful for his will to pursue poetry and playwriting. Not many 20-year-olds today can claim to have made such a bold decision. It is at this moment in his life that he determined his identity in history by committing to his love for art. He wrote not only dramas and poems, which were pieces that demonstrated his lively musicality and mastery over the German language, but he also wrote essays on history and the aesthetical cultivation of the soul as imaginative and precise methods of constructing forms of ideas in one's mind. His mind held a vastness of the world that had not yet been fully uncovered. One particular piece that I want to discuss today for its unique character, for its ability to cross mediums of art, is his famous Ode an die Freude, the poem that would inspire Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. This musical work and poem holds a special place in my heart because I first heard it performed on New Year's Eve 2 years ago in Berlin at the historical Konzerthaus in Mitte. In the bitter cold of Berlin winter, I got to experience the joy of a New Year's Eve that was reminiscent of the celebration of Germans after the fall of the Berlin Wall. While it is personally sentimental, it weighs heavier in the hearts of people everywhere experiencing injustice. The poem, written in 1785, was inspired by the inception of the American Revolution the inception of the American Republic after the Revolution, and would later be used to invoke the same American revolutionary spirit in the European people. In its famous stanza, which became the lyrics of the fourth movement of Beethoven's Ninth, Schiller evokes the formidable power of joy as a force that is innate within every human being, regardless of class, creed, or ethnicity. I'm sure a lot of you will know this famous stanza in German, so if you want to sing along or recite along, you can. Freude, schöne Gütefunken, Tochter aus Elysium. Wir betraten Freude trunken, himmlische dein Heiligtum. Dein Sauber binden wieder, was die Mode streng gescheit. Alle Menschen werden Brüder, wo dein sanfter Flügel weit. The force of joy in this poem is not conjured from thin air or provoked from merely a sensuous experience of emotion, but from the force of art itself in its ability to instantly capture the imagination of the observer or listener and lift their perspective to new heights. A higher conception of one's own identity outside of their immediate experience. The condition of one's experience no longer dictates your thoughts any longer, but becomes situated in the unchangeable nature of your own humanity that you have either lost or forgotten in the jungle of constant bombardment of practical life. That constancy that you find in yourself are dein Zauber, Zauber and dein sanfte Flügel. It is from these characteristics that you realize that your soul wants to do nothing more than to soar to the summits of himmlische, dein Heiligtum. This was the well of power that the founding fathers had to drink from to bring about the First Republic. The brilliance of Schiller and Beethoven's contribution to the development of this idea towards a universal oneness is where we can locate ourselves in the changing, turbulent tidal waves of darkness. In that sense, Beethoven and Schiller are equal participants in the American Revolution, just as Washington, Adams, Hamilton, and Franklin were. The struggle against the British colonial system was the same fight for the posterity of humanity in Ode an die Freude. The Germans saw this as the case 50 years later when over 200,000 native Germans enlisted in the Union Army to fight once again against the British Confederates in the Civil War. The American soul became the German soul, as did the Chinese and Vietnamese souls joined together when Ho Chi Minh and Sun Yat-sen invoked Abraham Lincoln for their cause nearly a century later. It is only in universal history where we can see alle Menschen Würde Brüder. So today, I ask that in the name of Friedrich Schiller, the spirit and memory that this organization chooses to represent, we must develop the part of our soul that yearns for freedom, which lies in every one of us. In the same artistic manner that Schiller chose to commit to beauty, we must commit to our own dignity and self-determination as a people. The force which powers that motivation must be the joy that provokes us towards action for a better future in this fabric of our shared destiny. So let's join Carolina's call to action. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Ashley.
Thank you, Ashley. It is good when young people in America talk about Schiller, and hopefully also very soon in Germany. We have a little problem. Theoretically, we have to end the conference in a few minutes. But let me ask if we have a little more extra time to hear the last speakers. I don't know if the director of the theater is around to answer this. So, but please, not more than 10 minutes. Next speaker is Chérine Sultan from France, and she represents the Schiller Institute there. Thank you, Helga. I don't speak German, I don't speak English, I don't speak Spanish. So for those who understand French, I will speak this language. Yeah. So hello, dear listeners. Hello to those who are following us from the four corners of the globe. Are you familiar with the 10 imprescriptible rights of the readers? Oh, thank you. The right not to read, the right to skip pages, the right not to finish a book, the right to reread, the right to read anything, the right to bovarism, textually transmissible disease, the right to read anywhere, the right to scribe, the right to read aloud, the right to remain silent. I've just quoted Daniel Pénac in his essay, Like a Novel. And Daniel Pénac is a French novelist born, sorry. Oh, sorry, I don't know how to use it. Those were the last 5 rules. So I just quoted Daniel Pénac. So Daniel Pénac is a French novelist born in 1944. He first became a literature professor at the age of 25. Had he followed the conventional career path, he might have remained a cab driver or an illustrator. Indeed, he was more the kind of student who could be described as a dunce. His educational background was definitely not destined for a teaching career. However, he remained a teacher for 26 years before devoting himself fully to writing. As a child, his love of reading never wavered in the face of his severe learning difficulties. On the contrary, books were his refuge. Later in life, he developed an even greater passion for passing on this activity. I personally discovered him thanks to my French teacher in a vocational high school after my general baccalaureate. Students in this building, make them read a book? Oh, you're dreaming. One teacher who also ran a high school's radio club didn't stop at such labels. It's a pity there were not more like her for high school students in the science math stream. Up until then, the obligation to read Balzac, Molière, and Madame de Lafayette hadn't really allowed us to feel free to read the books we liked. But it's true that the right not to read and the right to read anything were unknown to us at the time. That said, with a little curiosity and patience, you can find non-academic teachers anywhere, anytime. The great poet Friedrich Schiller, author of The Brigands, Don Carlos, and Ode to Joy, also wore this hat at the age of just 30 when he became professor at the University of Vienna. On May the 26th, 1789, his inaugural lecture, quote, what is universal history and why is it studied, promised to be such a success that the hall initially chosen was already packed for the hour beforehand, filled with stage fright at the sight of his troops of students, whose appetite was not to be disappointed, as well as galvanized for the same reasons. Schiller later recounted his pleasure of seeing the crowds grow in this way, and felt rather encouraged. But little by little, the crowds grew to such an extent that the waiting room, vestibule, and staircase were bursting at the seams, and entire troops were withdrawing for lack of space. So moving all these young people for the maximum auditorium caused such a stir in the town that the inhabitants thought it was a fire. And people were told, it's the new teacher is about to give his lesson. So as he continued his lectures in history and philosophy, he responded passionately to the students' demands for attention. And as Régnier, a translator of Schiller's work into French, recounts in his French language biography of the German poet, published on the occasion of the centenary, I quote him, Schiller, he first chose Tuesday and Wednesday for 6 to 7 o'clock in the evening for his lessons, so as to have 5 days free for his preparation and other work. His teaching including ancient history up to Alexander the Great, from which the following famous essays has taken some ideas on early human society using the Mosaic tradition as a guide, the mission of Moses, and the legislation of Lycurgus and Solon. In this regard, I would like to quote Régnier's testimony. So I quote him. These pieces are full of ingenious ideas and written in a sober, simple style. You can feel the good influence of teaching in them. In the first two, the author, as is to be accepted from all that we already know of him, gives career to his mind as a very free thinker, and like so many others, he shows, if I am not mistaken, how impotent rationalism is when it wants to explain and interpret everything, to lift all the veils, to pierce all the darkness, to clear up all the mysteries,
but at least he mixes into his exposition nothing of that lightness which is too long in fashion in such matters. The dissertation on the two great legislators of Sparta and Athens would not, I believe, satisfy a scholar or a philosopher from the point of view of modern science. But despite the exaggeration and narrowness of views that are noticeable and from which half knowledge hardly escapes, it reads with pleasures like anything written with wit and originality. What the poet-teacher lacked above all was this general preparation, this solid, slowly matured instruction, which cannot be replaced, however laborious, by research carried out on a daily basis and for the occasion. It was too obvious, contemporary witnesses tell us, but he often only knew what he was teaching the day before. His imagination, his luminous insights seduced young people who passed over both his Swabian accent and his overly oratorical style, and no doubt didn't mind seeing him sometimes change his history lessons into an eloquence class. End of quote. On reading this, many will say that it does indeed take a slowly matured preparation, as Régnier suggests. And perhaps some of you will think that a teacher who uses his vigor and imagination to make up for the shortcomings of his hasty research sins against deontology. Yes, of course. But on the other hand, passion for ideas and human cultures are, I believe, the primary fuel in this profession. Perfection in analysis can never be achieved. And while accuracy of purpose must remain the guiding principle, it must never dampen the desire to act, nor but people in the belief that understanding humanity is impossible. Through these reflections, I wish to promote the commitment of young people to build the next 50 years, to nourish themselves with the great authors, to pursue great historical and philosophical research, like Schiller. As long as you draw on the impassioned gaze of future generations, no academician or other expert will be able to tarnish your enthusiasm with their benevolent corrections of your errors and approximations. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Chérine, for that.
Thank you, Chérine, for that very
insightful presentation. Next, for our wonderful fourth panel here, we have Daniel Burke, a very good friend back in the United States of the Schiller Institute and a leader in the youth recruitment process. Thank you so much for coming all the way here, Daniel. Welcome.
Okay. So,
Donc,
here I am at the end.
Je suis à la fin.
Good. Great spirits now on earth are sojourning. Thus begins an 1817 sonnet by John Keats. He praises with expectant optimism the genius poets at work in England, whom he says will give the world another heart and other pulses. Shall we not recite that verse today? Our hopes and desires for humanity aroused by the quality of leadership that exists on this planet today, setting out to bring mankind into a new relationship with the universe, increasingly as a mature species committed to the development of humanity as a whole? Any who listen with care to the comments given by heads of state at the recent BRICS conference will see this potential unfolding. If the abysmal quality of the political officials in European nations and the United States dampens your optimism, no one would blame you. But then, each of us is called upon to change that condition and the culture that produced it, to use the innate capacity for creative reason within to introduce a necessary idea for our society and for humanity as a whole, the idea of a new, just international security and development architecture. And in this context, the potential and necessity of a global movement of youth dedicated to bringing about this change together must be deeply felt. In the youth, the older generations see the future. If young generations together embody the love of mankind that our world requires, what parent could reject them? Lyndon LaRouche advised us many times that the key to such a process is to have fun overturning fraudulent axioms and inspiring others to discover their own creative identities. What stands in the way of the advancement of such a crucial change? The mission of the International LaRouche movement for over 50 years, and of all who take responsibility for humanity's next 50 years. What are the aspects of our own cultural identities which we take for granted? We don't even see them, because they are the fishbowl in which we have been swimming. Here we are, in fact, loose in the grand ocean, but only swimming round and round in little circles as though we had never left our fishbowl. Think about the people that you discussed this conference with. What were their replies to you when you shared with them an inspiring vision of where humanity should go and invited them to come? Ja, aber das Problem ist, yes, but think about what other people will say. No one else will agree. Be practical. Helga Zepp LaRouche has asked us to investigate the ideologies that hold back our societies, in order then to cunningly overthrow them. Today I want to briefly address the concept of vox populi, otherwise called public opinion, or as Lyndon LaRouche sometimes called it, pubic opinion. We all know that what is popular or not, what is allowed to be known widely and embraced, and what is kept hidden or denigrated, is not a matter of the opinions of the people. Far from it. An advanced method of mass psychology, as dreamt of by Lord Bertrand Russell, whom Lyndon LaRouche called the most evil man of the 20th century, has been at work to defend the so-called interests of the modern British Empire and its junior partners on Wall Street. Social media and artificial intelligence have been helpful tools for these nefarious intentions. The essential matter, however, is a practice that goes back much further. In the year 2000, Lyndon LaRouche wrote the following: "To the present day, the legacy of pagan Rome and its empire dominates the cultures of globally extended European civilization, including the USA itself. Typical of the prevalence of the romantic degeneration dominant in US political culture today is the curious adoration of the mere name of democracy, whose presently putative referent is nothing other than a continuation of the notion of popular opinion, as the ancient pagan oligarchy of patrician Rome defined vox populi, as the opinion of the dumbed masses of predators, populari. Predators constituting the common pagan Roman pestilence, otherwise known as plebeians. This popular opinion, vox populi, public opinion, as Walter Lippmann defined it, was the mechanism of corruption by means of which the Roman plebeians were controlled as a deployed force of conquest and rapine against the targets of their depredations. The vast propaganda machine known as the mass media and its ugly cousin, social media, are the most obvious elements of this method of corruption. And then professional sports, popular music, pornography, all of which induce the population into Dionysian fits, the so-called dumbing down of the population. What is your free time taken up with? The development of your mind, the enjoyment of classical beauty, or are you handing your head on a platter to the oligarchy by seeking out what is popular? Take notice of the seemingly unconscious way that you direct your attention to that which is notable only because it is popular. It is trending. How many times did you check your phone in one day? How much of that is simply because Vox Populi is constantly tugging at your shirt and sometimes screaming in your ear? Socrates dealt with this subject in Plato's Republic, from the standpoint of the corruption of the youth by the sophists, who denied the existence of truth and maintained the supremacy of rhetoric. Socrates describes the pressures on youth to become sophists, the boos and cheers of the crowd and of their teachers. How can a young person who has been taught that what is just is whatever induces the crowd to approve of you stand up to those pressures? Each of these adventurers, whom these men call sophists, teach no other thing but those dogmas of the vulgar which they approve when they are assembled together, and call it wisdom. Just as if a man had learned what were the wrathful emotions and desires of a great and strong animal he were nourishing, how it must be approached, how touched, and when it is most fierce or most mild, and from what causes, and the sounds which on several occasions it was wont to utter, and at what sounds uttered by another the animal is rendered both mild and savage. And having learned all these things by associating with the animal for a long time, should call this wisdom. And, as if he had established an art, should apply himself to teaching it, whilst yet, with reference to these dogmas and desires, he knows not in reality what is beautiful or base, good or ill, or just or unjust, but should pronounce all these according to the opinions of the great animal, calling those things good in which it delighted, and that evil with which it was vexed, and should have no other measure as to these things. Pardon. Having heard from Socrates on the matter, allow me to address one further implication. Jeremy Bentham is best known for his Introduction to the Principles of Morals and Legislation of 1780, in which he established the satanic doctrine of utilitarianism, an outright attack on the 1776 American Declaration of Independence and its Republican conception of man and government. It was Bentham who, on behalf of Lord Shelburne, organized the Jacobin terror in France. Crucial in that process was his emphasis on the tribunal of public opinion, a method by which the Republican movement of Lafayette could be brutally attacked. John Bowring, the executor of Bentham's estate, summarized Bentham's views on international law. Though there be no distinct official authority capable of enforcing right principles of international law, there is a power bearing with more or less influence on the conduct of all nations as of all individuals, however transcendently potent they may be. This is the power of public opinion, and it is to the end of directing this power rightly that rules of international law should be framed. Today, the rules-based liberal order is not other than a Benthamite global oligarchy that attempts to manage nations through the power of vox populi, and a rationalist method that can only yield collapse. Will we transform and uplift our world by seeking together unto true principle, such as those expressed in Helga Zepp-LaRouche's 10 Principles of a New Security and Development Architecture? Or will we abandon our powers of discovery and spend our precious time sweeping the droppings of the beast of popular opinion? It is our choice to make. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Daniel.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Unfortunately, we have a little more time, extra time, but as we also have to take down the technical machines. So we have only like some minutes for questions from the audience to the speakers of the panel. So just say to whom you address your question, and so the person with the mic will go to you. So if you have comments, when your heart is full and your mouth is more than full, please go ahead.
Ja, ach ja, ich wollte nur etwas vergangenen Tage noch erwähnen.
I want to mention something.
Gestern über diese Klimakatastrophe,
Yesterday, there was the debate on climate.
gehört.
So I heard about CO2 neutral things and all that.
CO2-frei ist natürlich ganz klar, das gibt es nicht.
Emission neutral that doesn't exist. And if one would do that, we would all suffocate. Without CO2, there is no oxygen. That should be at least mentioned. And the other thing,
hier haben wir ein ganz großes Problem.
There's a big problem where we are in Austria and in Italy. There's a work on the tunnel through the Alps, the longest tunnel of the world. Germany is the only country where this was privatized, while in the neighbor countries it is state-owned. And they modernize, and while in Germany there was hardly anything happens, and that is not mentioned. And this is
ihre Höfe, also die Gefahr laufen, ihre Höfe aufgeben müssen.
Farmers are in danger of giving up their land so that there's no more land for agriculture. So my idea is that maybe we can do a meeting on this subject in connection with a new Silk Road, that we should do that. And Helga answers, this is a very good idea, and I would like, if it's possible, with people in the audience, this idea of Mr. Strickner, who just spoke, we should take that up, and things we did in this weekend, we have to bring it out in all lands. And so if we can do similar meetings in, for example, Rosenheim, where he is from, and I'm sure we can do many speakers, have many speakers on the question of energy, infrastructure, and voice of the global south, and that should go into the population. So if you have in your circles, friends, colleagues, networks, if you have the idea that we have these discussions more in Germany, you should tell us, and we are more than ready to do that. So, any more questions? And please be short. We don't have much time.
Okay, I have a short question now that
I had come to the understanding that much of the world's problem is because of the colonized period. But then what is Lyndon LaRouche's explanation of literature and culture from the so-called colonized world? How about getting to learn that? Thank you.
Also ich bin absolut entschlossen, also dass wir die also was im ersten Tag die
convinced
Hauptthematik
that
der
we
Konferenz war,
need
dass wir
what the
Weg
themes
finden
of the
müssen,
first
wie
day of the
wir
conference, that we have to find a way how in Germany and in
aus dieser
Europe
geopolitischen
we can get out
Konfrontation
of this
herauskommen
geopolitical
und
confrontation
im Grunde als
and
Alternative
as an
die
alternative
Idee,
have the
dass wir in
idea
Europa mit dem globalen Süden
that
kooperieren
Europe
sollen
has to cooperate with the
deren
global South
Entwicklung, also dieses
for
Crash-Programm. Ich habe
their
jetzt das
development. We have that crash
grafisch
program.
im Prozess noch befindende
I
Studie, die wir
mentioned that
machen, Joint
a
Ventures, wie
new
wir
study
in
that we're
Afrika
right
und
now
auch mit
working
dem
on
Oasisplan im
and
Nahen
in
Osten
Africa, also with the Oasis plan in the Middle
investieren
East.
können zwischen den BRICS-Staaten und den
So
Europäern.
between
Wir haben also
BRICS and
absolut vor,
Europe,
dass das eine
and
Kampagne wird. Und da möchte ich
we
Sie
are
eigentlich auch alle
absolutely
bitten, wenn Sie die Idee
determined to
für
do a
gut
campaign
halten,
about
für
this. And
richtig,
if you
dass Sie uns helfen,
like
das
this
in
idea
alle
and think it
Landessysteme
is right, that
reinzubringen.
you
Wir haben
help
also sehr
to
viele
bring it
Kontakte
everywhere.
auch
We
in
have a lot of
Afrika. Wir
contacts
haben
in
einen kleinen
Africa.
Bruchteil davon
You
gehört
saw just a
mit den
tiny
Beiträgen
bit of that,
von Dr.
part of
Pandor,
that from Dr.
Abimeko,
Pandor,
Professor
Abimeko,
Lumumba,
Professor
Herr
Lumumba,
Amor, der kein
Mr.
Visum
Amua,
bekommen hat.
who didn't
Aber wir
get a
haben noch sehr
visa
viele
to
andere
come here.
Kontakte und planen
But we have
eigentlich, das
many,
auch
many more
in
contacts, and we
Afrika zu
plan
einem
to
Thema
do
zu
thing
machen.
to make this
Und
a
darüber
theme
hatte ich
in
gestern mit
Africa.
Carolina
And yesterday
gesprochen
I
aus
talked with
Mexiko.
Carolina from
Die hat mich
Mexico about
gefragt,
this.
also was sollen die
She asked,
Jugendlichen denn
what
machen? Was ist die
should young people do?
Hauptaufgabe,
So
die wir
the
als
main
Jugendliche
task
jetzt
that
als
we have
Lehrer
as
aus dieser
young
Diskussion ziehen sollen? Ich
have
habe ja gesagt,
as
also
a
wir müssen die
from this
Jugendlichen
conference, the
einbinden
youth has to be part
im Kampf für
of the
Entwicklung,
fight
nicht
for
nur durch
development,
Entwicklung.
peace
Also
through
ich bin
development.
absolut zuversichtlich, wenn wir
I'm very
Jugendliche
convinced,
aus
optimistic.
54
If we have
afrikanischen Staaten,
young people from
aus
54
einer
African
großen Anzahl von
states,
lateinamerikanischen
many,
und
many
asiatischen
Latin
Staaten,
American and
wenn die
Asian
anfangen
states,
würden
if
und sagen,
they
wir
would
verlangen
start and say,
Entwicklung,
we
das ist unsere
demand
Zukunft,
development, this is
diese
our
Stimme
future,
wird, die nicht
that
gehört
this
wird.
would be
Sie haben ja von
a voice
Professor
that
Zhang
will be heard.
im
You heard
ersten
from
Panel
Professor
gehört,
Chang in the
dass
first
zum Glück
panel
die Welt nicht so
that
ist, wie man sie hier
the
aus Deutschland oder Europa sich
fortunately the world
vorstellt,
is not the
sondern da hat
way
gerade
it
diese Asienentwicklung
seems from
stattgefunden.
Europe or from the West.
Die
There was just the
ASEAN-Staaten
Asian
haben
ASEAN
einen völlig
summit.
anderen Weg
They have a
gefunden, wie sie
total
miteinander
different
kooperieren können,
way
auf
to
der Basis
cooperate
von
with each other
Respekt für die
on the
Souveränität
basis
des
of
anderen, für
sovereignty of each,
Gleichheit, für
equality,
Nicht-Einmischung in das
and a
andere politische
non-intervention
System, was
in
der eine
other
oder andere
political
Staat
systems.
hat. Und das ist eigentlich ein
And that
Modell,
is
was
a
früher mal die
model
EU hatte, aber die
which
EU
the
hat sich ja in der
EU
letzten
used to have,
Zeit
but in the
immer
last
mehr und
period, the
mehr
EU is
zu
more and
einer
more
Bürokratie
become a
entwickelt und viele
bureaucracy
Mitgliedstaaten
where
gar nicht
many
mehr
member
sich
states
vertreten fühlen.
don't
Ich
feel
denke mal, dass
represented.
im Grunde da
And
so ein Dialog
basically,
wirklich auch
the
sehr, sehr
dialogue,
fruchtbringend
such a
wäre. Und
dialogue
da
would
wird die
be very
Kultur natürlich
fruitful, and
absolut eine Rolle
culture
spielen.
would be
Weil wir
have a
haben ja nicht
main role.
ohne Grund
And not without the reason that
Die
we
Melodie der
have
afrikanischen
the
Nationalhymne
melody of the
als
South
erstes Lied vor
African
die
hymn
Konferenz gestellt.
had at the
Das kann
very
nur eine
beginning of the
Absichtserklärung
conference.
sein, dass wir also
This is
vorhaben,
a declaration of
auch die Poesie,
intention
die
that
Musik
also
von
poetry,
den
music,
anderen
and so forth
Kulturen in diesen
of
Prozess
other
mit
cultures will
einzubeziehen.
be part of
Und
this
ich glaube, das hat Ihnen
process.
alles
And
sehr
I
gut
think
gefallen.
you like this a
Man
lot.
lernt wirklich
You
unglaublich
really
viel dazu. Und
learn
meine
a lot
kurze
more.
Antwort auf Ihre
So my
Frage
short
ist
answer is
absolut, wir werden das machen.
absolutely yes, we will do this.
Also letzte Gelegenheit, wenn
So
Sie
last
einen unserer
chance
jungen Menschen noch
to
mal
talk to one our
fragen
young
wollen oder
people,
inspirieren
ask
wollen, jetzt ist die
questions,
Gelegenheit.
be inspired, inspire. Now's the chance to do it. Oh, here's one more contribution.
As we seek to create an international youth movement, I think we have to storm the university campuses. And I'd love to know what you think about that and how we could approach something so that we can create a controversy that people cannot ignore and put them on the stage of history in every continent that we are acting on, in every country that we are able to do this. How would you approach that?
Also ich denke natürlich, vor allen Dingen junge Leute müssen mit
So I
jungen
think
Leuten sprechen.
mainly young people have to talk to young people. That's obvious. But I also think a society like Germany, maybe other European nations, basically there's a difference of generation. The older people who maybe somehow knew World War II in person or in explanations from the parents who were in the war times and the rubble and the reconstruction from that. We have a totally different knowledge of that danger, what could happen with another war in Germany. And you see that the younger generations hardly know this danger. They're not conscious of it. When there was the oil crisis in the early 80s, it was absolutely clear that a world war was quite near, and Chancellor Schmidt was talking about this nearly every day, and the hundreds of thousands of people were on the street. And today, when the danger is much bigger, people are not conscious about this, and especially young people. It seems that it means nothing to them, and we have to use the knowledge of older people, the experiences of older people. We have to transmit that. So I think everybody think, how can you be an activist and organizer to help that this seemingly unavoidable train wreck that is stopped in the last moment, and the course has changed, as Schiller said it in his talk about universal history, 1789 in Jena, when he became history professor. He said in that we understand that valuable things have been brought to us from many generations. Who would not have the noble idea of giving that further to younger future generations? And one thing anyone can do something. This is my appeal to you all, that you help, that use this incredible historical situation with extreme dangers, as like Professor Tran from Russia said. It is worse than the Cuban Missile Crisis. Without going into the details, you can read our daily news brief. I would it doesn't cost much, €10 per month, and you can have it first 2 weeks for free. This is where Ray McGovern said, this is a quality of a briefing which US presidents have normally. So see the development every day, not just in some newsletter where other papers are cited. This is so the digested result of 50 years independent intelligence, which my husband started this then, that you inform yourself and wake up every day, say, what do I have to know? How is the world developing? What's new? We have a historic development. You have seen it in the last weeks and months. Every day there's something new, some new development, be it Gaza, Iran, Ukraine. Surprising new surprises from President Trump, who always has new things that he comes up with, how he looks at the world, which has real consequences, be it tariffs or whatever. So I really ask you, if you take something from this conference, we need in Germany citizens, real citizens, who feel responsible. So basically, you all should say, I don't like politics like it is right now, but in the end, it is my problem. But because we, the people, are the sovereign. Wir sind das Volk. We are the sovereign. But our political class, which doesn't care, and they forgive their oaths, and our chancellor has the promise of the election campaign. He would just broke it the next day. If we let that go, it's not the fault of the political class alone. It is the fault of us all. And that would probably be another conference. Why are we in Germany at this point? We'd have to start maybe even 200 years. What was with the great classical period in Germany? How was it ruined? How did we get away from that high status of Beethoven, Schiller, and Heine, and so forth? So that involves the Romantic, Schopenhauer, pessimism, and the First World War, Versailles, an example for a peace that could not work because it was unjust. And then the people who were in the war, in a long war in Verdun, etc., and through hyperinflation, 1922, and then the depression and mass, which made Nazi possible, and then came World War II. But after that, there was not 0 hours. There was re-education, Congress for Cultural Freedom. This was how it was tried to destroy our higher culture, to cut that from us. That was the program of to be against Beethoven, to mix Beethoven with 8-tonal music, 12-tone music. And if you go in a concert today, like in a Schleswig-Holstein festival or Rheingau festival, it is really rare to have a real classical concert. Maybe a classical piece, but then also modern things. And that was a method. So the idea, what is classical thinking, was ruined. My husband always said, a people which cannot think classically, not Socratically, no method of dialogue to get closer to the truth. That's classical thinking. Oh, there's classical form. And a musical or poetic idea, and that is developed, and there's a finish at a higher level. And while the Romantics, there was everything was flowing, no end, no beginning, no end. Night and day are the same. Dream is reality. So this is the method of talk shows. There's always soap opera. Every day a new film and no end. People don't think things through to the end. And my husband said, such a population, it is has no will. She's a easy prey for the manipulation. So I think it would be extremely important if possible, all of you go home and think about it. What would it mean if you make this step in your life to be a citizen, responsibility for the country in that extreme situation? So we are ready to discuss about ideas. We think of us also as idea inventors, as Ramsey Clark, former U.S. Justice Minister, said, these people are producers of ideas, and that's why some people don't like about us. They think they should be the only ones who produce ideas. They don't like this if others have totally different ideas. So I invite all of you to join us. This is the shortest and most effective way to do all that we can to save our beautiful nation, because our nation is beautiful.
Es geht ja nicht nur Deutschland. Es geht ja darum, dass wir in jeder Nation.
This is not only about Germany. We want a youth movement in all nations, which connects us to have a new economic order and university of ideas, and more than that, a citizens movement of young people who take leadership to say we can get out of the crisis. Greatest dangers is that people have submit to fear. But if we have active young people in all nations, not only save their own country, but to build a new renaissance, because the West needs a new structure. We need a revolution, a Renaissance revolution to get forward. Not only in Germany. Germany alone will not get out of the crisis, and we need this in all nations. This is absolutely true. So I focused on Germany because Germany is right now a center of the problem. If we go the way of militarization, I think we will, Professor Tran made that very concrete. The Russians will react, and they will not in the Pacific, but here. And this is not clear to people. This is why I was referencing Germany, but also, of course, the Africans who were there at the conference. They're absolutely sure that they want a youth movement to educate it with totally different qualities of leadership than earlier generations who, with the spirit of Bandung and a new economic order, to realize that. And that was the beginning of the Schiller Institute, an international movement. We have more than 40 years of history, which you can also look up, where you can. You're totally right. We really need an international new movement with the BRICS in cooperation to go to a new economic system without there's a war.
So people are on me that we have to cut things short. I thank you very much to everybody, to all speakers who have done everything that this broad panorama would be visible at this conference. I thank you at all people who helped, the cooks, the logistics people, the translators, those who have brought the system to function for translation, and people who haven't seen, but there was a cooperation of many forces. So when you decide to join us, you are heartily welcome. And I think that you have sit through 2 days of conference. Thank you very much.